Welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast. My name is Sara Vicente Barreto and I'm your host. I'm a corporate strategist, problem solver, social entrepreneur, writer, mom of two, and passionate for growth, at home, in business, or in my community. This is season 2 of the Make Space for Growth podcast, a moment of lift. 2020 will be remembered by most as the coronavirus year. As a world, that was our common factor. But individually, we all had different stories. We all experienced it differently. For 2021, our journey continues, strengthened by what we leave behind, hopeful for what lies ahead. From a good, bad, or so-so year, we rise to the challenge ahead. We lift our souls to believe. We lift our minds from the fear. We lift our lives from the dark times that we leave behind. This is our moment of lift as we get out of this crisis stronger and together. Whilst 2021 did not start in a great way, the inflection point is upon us. As such, for this season, I go after a moment of lift. I restart my virtual travels around the world to speak to women leaders on the change they experienced and how they see the path forward. We will be talking about the moment where we find ourselves as we choose to effect change. The moment of turning around and choosing to move forward and facing life fearless and joyful. Join me for this journey to find out how, because it is time for hope and light. My guest today is Amy Williams. Amy is passionate about recognizing the value of female capital while understanding that defining women according to their responsibilities or age is limiting. She launched Fem-Foundry, a one-of-a-kind global platform and mobile app, in order to represent and connect women and advocate for women in leadership positions in a broader and more meaningful way. She's an experienced entrepreneur, innovator and business founder, and a prominent and progressive leader in the media and marketing sector. Amy, welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Amy, before we talk business, may I ask you, what was your favorite thing to do as a child? And what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, sure. I love that question. My favourite thing to do as a child was anything related to sport. I was a bit of a boy really as a kid, and my mum would dress me on all these like pretty dresses, and then we lived in the countryside, so I would appear back covered in mud, tights, holes in my tights. I was generally up a tree chasing, something round in a field or outside. I loved being active, and I really, really wanted to be a vet when I grew up. So as I say, I grew up in the countryside, on a kind of, it wasn't our farm, but there was a lot of animals. I was always bringing weird animals home, that to the delight of my mother. I brought a pigeon home with a broken wing. I brought a rat home and thought it was like, I was mummy, this mouse is like dying. I brought a hedgehog home, all sorts. Yeah, so mum was like, oh, for God's sake. So yeah, I really wanted to be a vet. Ended up nothing like a vet. Sadly, I wasn't intelligent enough, or I don't think applied myself enough at school. So yeah, if I could do it all again, I would love to be a vet.
That's very funny, but you said an expression there that I'm not sure we're allowed to say these days, that you said you're a bit like a boy.
I know, when I said it, I was like, oh, maybe that's not the right thing to say anymore. Well, maybe it is. We just have a different, it needs to, much more normalised and celebrated. But growing up for me, that was very normal. My parents massively celebrated it. They were like, we don't care. You need to be who you want to be.
No, I hear you. And given what we're going to talk about today, I think we're going to try and not stereotype in that way. So I spoke briefly about you in the intro, but there's nothing like firsthand. Can you tell us a bit about your journey and the business that you're running today and how you come to set it up?
My journey is there's always a personal story, right? I think to most people who have a journey to being a founder. I think for a lot of people, some of the best things in their life happen by accident, and you're kind of like forced into it. I knew from a very early age that I was entrepreneurial. I've worked for massive corporates that, as I'm sure you know, have a lot of red tape, and you're kind of boxed into a lot of initiatives and things that you have to adhere to. I was always the rule breaker. I was always like, can we do this? But trying to challenge ways of doing things differently and more efficiently. So I was always that annoying person. And my dad was an entrepreneur. I was very, very close to my dad. I really admired him for everything that he built from the ground up. He was from the days of the proper cold calling, knock on the door salesman, and he built multi-million pound business on that basis. So I always knew it was within me. I just didn't know. It was a bit like your question of what did you want to be when you grew up? I liken it to that, in that I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. Amazing and fabulous as my media career was, and I really loved it for a real amount of time, but there becomes a time when I just found it, I was very disillusioned with the media space. I found it had become very paint by numbers, very vacuous in that aspect. And I knew that I wanted more from my life. And a set of personal circumstances kind of pushed me into what I now do with Fem-Foundry. And pretty much, I won't bore you with the details, but every pillar of my life came down, from relationship to that then caused like finance issues. I lost my dad. All sorts of things happened in a very short space of time. And long story short, I was working for Vice Media, which was eye-opening to say the least, in terms of that, what we're talking about, that male feminine kind of divide and how that works in corporate systems. I was then approached by a SaaS company to go and run a new project that they were running and trying to build on their SaaS platform. And that was called Female Tribes. And that was a piece of research done by Wunderman Thompson. That's the biggest piece of research ever done on women across the globe. 22,000 women, 19 countries, took 5 years to complete, absolutely huge piece of undertaking. And it was so interesting. I went to run that kind of 6 months into that, that company sold their technology. As part of that, I took on what was then Female Tribes, because I'd seen this massive gap in the market, but I knew I had a passion for this space. But then once you're really put into that space and you start looking at the figures that are quite frightening and also really enlightening and powerful, some of those figures, you really get into it. Saw a huge gap in the market for what is now Fem-Foundry. So that's how I started. It was Female Tribes. We evolved into what is now Fem-Foundry. It was my real passion to create a platform where all women can feel that they belong. And I felt there was a huge gap in the market missing that catered to this, that wasn't just, these like very niche verticals, as important as they are. And
thank you for that, Amy. And women empowerment is a passion that I've developed over the last few years, and why I've created this podcast, really. And it's interesting because you've said a few times in your description, this is a huge gap, and how you've realized some of this along the way. Can you share a bit, why do you feel like the time is now and we can't let this fall behind, and why do women need a special platform for them? Is that inclusive?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think it really, really is all about inclusivity. And I think there's kind of two parts to that question. And the first one, in terms of, why now and why it's so important, is that I wanted to create and really felt that women needed a space where they could connect and unite and feel that they belonged without fear of judgment. And I think, having worked in media for 20 years as well, a long time, kind of seen it all, that judgment, whether we like it or not, absolutely exists. And I really wanted women to have a place where they didn't have that fear of judgment when it comes to age, background, colour, sexual preference, marital status, whether they have children or not, because there's so many stigmas put on women for so many different reasons. And I really wanted to bring everyone together, whether that's working mothers or career trailblazers or both, and give them a platform where they can collaborate and express themselves freely, side by side. Because I think what a lot of platforms do is, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but I think a lot of platforms have been created in niches, because that had a real rise and was really big at the time. And it is very needed in some cases, but there's a lot of platforms, as an example, that are just set up for mums. which is great and has its place. But I know loads of mums who don't want to be just kind of bucketed into only being a mum. They're a mum, they're a businesswoman, they're, you know, a multitude of different things. So we wanted to create a platform where everybody could exist side by side, and we're not kind of siloing those women into, or bucketing those women into those different things. I personally think putting women into boxes is reductive, and I think it stifles progress towards a more equal society, which, you know, kind of brings me on to the investment side and the figures. You know, women have timeless, you know, countless times, particularly in the last year, I think, proved that they're capable of taking on many things at once. We have to change the conversation and recognise the value of female capital, whilst understanding that defining women according to their responsibilities or age is very limiting. And I think instead we have to celebrate their achievements and aspirations, to really inspire and boost, you know, confidence. This year alone, global VC funding for female founders has dropped dramatically. You know, we were seeing those figures rise, and then COVID's obviously hit. And as we know, the pandemic has disproportionately affected women in the workforce. I read a frightening article the other day that was suggesting that the pandemic could potentially have put women back by 20 years. I'm kind of like, not on my watch, you know, and this is why we all need to be, to your point about the time is now, we really have to, we're not going to achieve this in silos. The only way that we can achieve this is by all coming together and creating one collective force to shift all of these things that need to shift. And it's not about competing with each other. It's about really coming together and working out how we can all work together. And that's what Fem-Foundry ultimately is about.
I think you make a few points there that I'll stop you for a second. I think the first one on, you know, the reductive point of putting women in a box is interesting, right? Because, you know, as a mother, I've probably been in one of those mother networks. Yeah. And I have to admit, I'm like, after a while, like, can we talk about something else now? Or, you know, people tell me, oh, you know, we've been with this company for 17 years and that's what defines you. I'm like, well, that's one of the things that defines me. It's not, I'm not just one or the other. And I guess the platform, we're going to talk about it because we haven't said what the platform does yet. Yeah. I guess the platform allows you to pick your box and to be one in one day and another one in another day. I think the other thing you said that caught my attention was what happened in the pandemic was we thought we had advanced a lot because there was indeed more opportunity. There was indeed more growth you were observing in the numbers. But then when a crisis hits, and you need to evaluate who takes what role, I guess the box came back to the surface where a lot of women ended up being the ones providing for the education at home, or, you know, they kind of had side businesses because they weren't full-time at work, and therefore they had to let that drop because they couldn't take care of everything. Yeah. And so I do, just the stats we've been seeing are just a bit extraordinary. Yeah. In terms of how much they would hold us back. And to be fair, I haven't seen enough of them for the developing world. It even feels like it could be a developed world phenomenon because, you know, things are in a different place in emerging markets. I think it was November alone, thousands of jobs lost in the US. They were 100% women. It's been a tough year for the advancement of the cause, I guess.
It's really horrifying. And I think, you know, I'm in the UK, you're in the UK, and I think the British government has massively let women down in terms of, I don't have kids, but I would be very angry if I had kids, and, you know, the school system and, you know, many working parents I know who are two-parent family were massively struggling because, you know, either one of them or both of them were working. If one had to give up their job, it was generally the mum. Not to mention, you've then got a multitude of single parent families. Imagine then having to juggle that and a job and homeschooling and, you know, being depressed in a global pandemic and everything else that they've got to do. And like you say, I think it's really, there's so many things that you can kind of cover up, but then this has really brought it to light that there is a fundamental problem and that we are fundamentally still very backwards in our thinking when it comes to women. And that has to change. change. The statistics were frightening before, especially when you look at women funding. 3% globally of all funding goes to women. That's horrifying. We're in 2021. And I think in the UK it's 1%, and in the US it's 2 or 2.8%. But I suspect that's just because they're larger, right? So 48% in the UK of VC investment firms are purely male. They don't have a woman on that team. Why is that? I mean, it's absolutely crazy. There's so many positive. There's been a rise in it, and there's a lot of female angel networks and all of this, but it hasn't changed. It's not changing quick enough.
In this time, where we still used to go out for lunch with friends. I was years ago. One of my friends is in VC. And I asked him, let me ask you a question. How many of pitches that you get are from women? I'm not even asking you how many you've already invested. I'm actually at the level before. There was this awkward silence, and he's like, I have to tell you, I don't remember the last time a woman pitched to us. And I was like, well, I'm going to leave you thinking about that then. I'm going to just walk out of here. And he's super conscious, father to girls, his wife works, he is actually someone who promotes women advancement quite a bit. And he was like, you're right, like it's not even how many we've invested in. It's actually the level before. One of the big things people talk about is the network. And if you don't have the network to get into those 49% pure male VCs, then how do you get there? And I know this is I know it's a problem close to your heart at the moment, because you're kind of going and working through the network yourself. It's not easy.
No one tells you about the network. This is one of my issues. Kind of take it back even a step before. It's that just assumption of you would know this network of people. Maybe I was very naive, but it was certainly something that was very new to me. And then it became quickly very evident that there's this whole network of people that probably takes years to, get to know, working out how to approach different people, all the words you use, and it's like, networking in normal times, it is easier in that sense of getting in front of people. But, especially now, that's so much more difficult and so much, more difficult to navigate. And that takes a lot of time. And something that I'm very passionate about with our network is to provide an education system around that and be like, guys, for someone coming in who's got absolutely no clue, who isn't from a financial background, who's never raised for a business before, to just take all of these steps back 10 steps to go, okay, before you even start thinking about this, you need to be doing this, and it takes around this amount of time. And to give a really easy framework to get people prepared, because if you're not and you just go into it and you've got no idea how long sort of these things take, then that can be really disillusioning and disheartening as well. I saw a thing the other day, which was a blog from a woman VC on Twitter, actually, and she really helpfully just did a little breakdown of, if you're raising friends and family like in olden times, pre-COVID, it was this timeline. If you're doing it now, and then it was friends and family VC, she went through, and I was like, oh, that's so helpful, because it makes you really, you're like, oh, wow, okay, so I'm actually doing well. Do you know what I mean? But there needs to be more of that. There needs to be more women being transparent and being honest about these things, that it's not, you don't just float in and get money. It just doesn't happen. If you do, good for you.
Yeah, well, you only hear about those, don't you? Let's, we've been teasing here about women's stats and about why it's important, and we went straight into raising money. Yeah. Why don't you tell us a bit about what the platform actually is? What is Fem-Foundry about? What can people find there, so that we kind of break this little trick we've been playing?
Yeah, what is this thing? To essentially boil it down, it's a mobile app and global platform. I could give you the one-liner of what it is, but that's boring. Ultimately, as I kind of alluded to before, it is a platform that does a multitude of things, and ultimately, diversity is absolutely at the heart of everything that we do. And I mean diversity from every angle, age, colour, background, as I said, sexual preference, mum, not mum. And we wanted to create a mobile app that that is for all women. So anyone can join, anyone can come on it. It doesn't matter whether you're 25 or you're 65. You know, we want there to be something for everyone. And ultimately, it is a space where you can connect with women from around the globe on a multitude of different topics. So that's from everything to do with health and fitness to business to raising finance. And then we've got some other stuff coming that's more along how to manifest, how to script. We're doing courses and talks on breath work and, you know, quite kind of new age things, obviously mental health. So that's a big part of our platform right now. We've kind of taken all the traditional technology elements, if you like, from other social platforms, other women's networking platforms and groups, and then given it a sort of media or publishing lens. Obviously, from my background, we have a podcasting section, we have our own podcast, we have a TV section, and we have what's called the edit. And the edit's really quite fundamental because you can go into like different rooms of the edit, if you like, and that's, you could go into business, you could go into finance, you could go into work and money, but then equally you've got health and fitness, wellness, mums. You know, there's pretty much everything on there that you would, for the all-encompassing woman. So like you say, you're a mum, but then you're also defined by, you know, very long career in what you do. So then you've got that work layer, but then you've got, I assume, all the other layers to Sarah that go with it. So, you know, you don't just want to be, you might want to go on there and read something about that's helpful to you about your kids, but equally then you can be somewhere else and talking about work and money, and you're connecting, your network is all in one place. So you're not having to go to open this browser for this or log into here for this or log into here for this. It's all in one place. And it's very much global, and we want to build that out globally so that we've got a real representation of women across the world rather than just you know, different little ecosystems.
I think the edit is, it gives you the ability, right, to go and look for something of your interest, but it doesn't define you, because actually when you start, you don't start at the edit, you start in an open living room, and then you can choose to go, you know, to a different room. One of the things you talk a lot about there are the Foundry Leaders. Can you talk about what they are and why you think they're important?
Taking it back to kind of female tribes and utilising that research and looking at that, one of the real fundamentals that came out of that research, which kind of frightened me quite a lot, was that 74% of women globally don't feel they have a positive female role model. And then when you break that down, they don't feel that they have a role model that is accessible. When I started to break that down even more from, like, you know, very small kind of user groups, it came down to the fact that although there's a lot of mentor and mentoring ecosystems that exist, there's still that very elitism going on, and that they like to say they've got a mentor, but they're afraid to actually ask that mentor the stupid questions that they really need to ask. And I was like, well, surely this is totally, I was like, this is the whole point of it, right? But I've been there in my career where editors and things like that I've considered my mentors. But, you know, sometimes you just don't want to look silly, or you don't want to be that fear of judgment, right? And women often are not our own best friends. We can be really quite shit to each other, let's face it. And I think particularly male dominated businesses, we are, you know, women are pitted against each other. There is that real fear of judgment and to ask those perceived silly questions. You know, I've been through it myself with, like I was just saying with the raise, there was lots of questions that I wanted to ask and kind of challenge as well. And be like, but why? And someone explained to me how this works, but I had a fear of asking them for looking, you know, for fear of looking silly, and that I was very acutely aware that I was a woman and I didn't want to be the silly woman asking questions. So the Foundry Leaders are there to sort of be those role models of the community. And what we wanted to do was take away the sort of influencer model, in the sense that some of them are big influencers. A lot of them are, you know, some of them you might not have heard of unless you're particularly in that industry. So if you were in STEM or finance, you would know who they are, or like sex tech or health tech. But if you were outside of that, you might not know who they are. So they might not have 1 million followers on Instagram, but they're very influential in their own communities. And that's what we wanted to create, sort of that mix of the influencers that people very much know and look up to, but equally women that have really carved out their own career and have a story behind that. You know, Beverly Knight is an example, is one of our Foundry leaders, and Bev is she's a really truly lovely person as well, and she's obviously carved out her own career and has got her story behind that. And we really want those leaders to be able to share that with the community, and we want to be able to give women leaders across a multitude of different sectors, from STEM to culture to music to health and fitness, wellness, etc., etc.
Yeah, the role models is actually really big, and it comes up all the time, right? And I'm coming from finance, that's a constant feedback we get. So I saw this quote on the platform the other day. It must have been for International Women's Day. Be the woman that fixes another woman's crown without telling the world it was crooked.
Yeah.
So I thought it was actually a really good way to express a bit of a change in attitude that we may still need to how we relate to other women. Because you talk about how you don't want to be the one feeling silly, but there were a lot of women on the other side making you feel silly.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you think the Fem-Foundry can maintain that focus on, and have those Foundry leaders, but at the same time be supporting the women and bringing them up together, and not as maybe we've done a lot of times in the past?
Yeah, so it's a huge fundamental core of who we are, and I would think a core difference of who we are. And we talk about the crown adjustment all the time. You mentioned earlier, why now? The time is so now, and we knew it, we could see it, we saw I could bore you to death with all the trends, but then ultimately COVID hit and blew the world up, and in a really positive way, massively accelerated what we already knew, was that if you have to work together, and whether that's male, female, collectively, we are a better force for, ultimately humanity if we all work together. There is a fundamental still problem with women particularly, and there's lots of different reasons for it, in the way that we are judged in society, in companies, all of those things we just talked about. But the crown adjustment is trying to teach women and young girls to, that exact phrase, to adjust each other's crown rather than try to knock them off. There's room for everyone. And actually, when you are surrounded by those women that are really trying to adjust your crown, and they're all there for the same reason, truly amazing, phenomenal things happen, and your learning is so accelerated beyond anything that if you were trying to compete. And that's what we really want to try and fundamentally teach women across, as I'm saying, across all of these different verticals. And that's not just in business. And I think, again, there's a lot of business sites out there for women. They use words like career, and then there's a lot of words that are quite negative towards, if you're ambitious as a woman, as an example, you're masculine and you're all these other things, which is absolutely ridiculous. Business is a huge focus of our site. The e-learning space, we've launched our academy, which is all about e-learning, but it's creating diversity in that space. So not every woman wants to be, really ambitious and wants to own their own company and wants to do X, Y, and Z. They might just want to know how they climb the ladder in wherever they are, in whatever field that they're in, and be able to do the best that they can do. And so I think it's really fundamental we don't miss those people, because so much at the moment just talking about launch your own business and do this for yourself. And that's great. I'm one of those people, but there's so many people that aren't like that. And we shouldn't be making them feel bad because they're not like that. Do you know what I mean? It's just,
or feel like they don't belong, right?
Exactly.
So I think we've explained it a bit, but one thing I always like to do a little bit at the podcast is also actually talk about what's behind it. What is the business? And we've also had a pandemic, which you've alluded to, and I think most of us have noticed it's not quite behind us yet. And so before we talk about the future, which is what I want to end as it is, let's look a bit backwards now. You launched Fem-Foundry right in the middle of the pandemic, or shall I say between waves?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you were probably preparing for a while. So when this hit, how did it affect your plans, and what stage did it hit you? Where were you in the process?
We originally launched as the Female Tribes brand, and that was our kind of test and learn. It was always going to be the test and learn phase. The test and learn phase happened. We were the very beta version of the app went live second week of March. So as Boris was announcing that the world was ending,
talk about timing.
and none of us knew what this thing was. I'll be very honest, we had some money that was about to come in from the US. Obviously that ground to a halt. I've been through so much in the last 5-6 years. I've always been resilient, but this really tested my resilience to every single level possible in a really positive way. It's fundamentally the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and it's not over. It really does make you better in a lot of ways, because you're like, okay, so this has happened, I can't change it, we can't do anything about it, we've just got to work out how we move through it. And actually, it really made me pivot into, I really noticed we had a much smaller kind of viewpoint on this and a smaller model of it. And then, as I said, COVID accelerated and kind of exponentially opened up all of these things that I'd been sitting in investor meetings with a lot of white middle-aged men going, well, this is the way the world's going to go. And they were all like, yeah, whatever. Like, who the hell is, who are you? And then COVID happened. I told you. So in a way, it highlighted a lot of those things, and a lot of statistics that to actually help me came to light, and it allowed us to pivot into and strengthen into what is now Fem-Foundry. So, I like to think that something much stronger and better came from it. But then, as you say, we launched Fem-Foundry mid-August. So then that's just before the second wave coming that year. Everyone was online, so that's brilliant. But then you've got, as we've just talked about, that have got kids that are trying to homeschool, that are also trying to run their own successful careers or jobs or whatever else. And so they're overwhelmed. And then you're trying to go to them and say, I've created this new app that's going to help your life. But as we've hit towards Christmas time, January time, I don't know what happened, but it was like a light switched on. And all of a sudden, I think people, were very much now au fait with COVID to kind of know you can see the end of the tunnel. And the brand just really started to gain real traction and talkability. And that, when I could see the embers of it, it's just started to grow and grow and grow really organically, which has been amazing. I can't tell you that feeling when you've been through hell and back in your own company, and founders will know this, when you start to see that. And it's funny because, you talk about VCs and everything, and particularly in that male dominated space, they want you to just throw loads of money at it, like Clubhouse. Let's just do, why we got millions of people on it? It's because I haven't put £1 million behind it, that's why. And if you speak to most women, you're obviously one of our huge supporters, they want it to grow organically before you then start putting that money behind it. And that's what we wanted, because we want this really, authentic, organic product that we know women are actually finding helpful and going to use in the future. Yeah,
you're taking the step to go there and to intentionally find it, which does make a huge difference then to your engagement on the platform. We talk about business here, and we go a little bit personal as well. How was your day-to-day life affected? You were obviously an entrepreneur already, so you were probably working day and night by then.
Yeah.
Day and night became a bit of a blur when you stopped being able to see people and get out. Where were you for lockdown, and how did this affect you personally as you woke up as Amy every day?
I've always been quite okay with my own company. It's a very bizarre thing to say, but in a way, that the first lockdown was sort of okay, because obviously we were in summer and everything else, you could get outside. But I was in London then, and being a country girl at heart, like I found being hemmed in London very difficult. I don't think for me creatively, for my mind, not having space, it's just not a good thing. But I've got 2 Labradors, so they get me out of the house 2 or 3 times a day, and I think they were more sick of walking than I was, and like, not another bloody walk. In a way, it was quite nice, because as you'll know, when you're in the midst of launching your own company, you're in the pit, live, breathe, work, everything is work, and you're working stupid hours, and you're in a pandemic, there's nothing else to do, so you're like, well, I might as well work. I'm a workaholic anyway. But then here I was like, oh, sod it, I just found myself just carrying on with stuff. In a way, it was quite nice, because I didn't have FOMO, because the rest of the world was also stuck indoors.
Like, all my friends are having fun and I'm here watching this business.
Yeah, exactly. So at least it wasn't summertime where all my friends are out in bars partying, and you've got no money, you're cash strapped, you're at home, all of that, but everybody else was too. So I was kind of like, okay, this gives me sort of time to crack on. I moved out to Oxfordshire just before the second lockdown. Massively helped my mental health, and just having the space to be able to just get outside and be away from London. I think a lot of people found London very, very difficult. Been very, very tough. I think the toughest thing is the length of time. And listen, when you're a founder, it's very lonely. And again, this is something that I really want to utilize the platform to educate and create a community for people, because I didn't have that community. And I think if you're a founder and you either don't have friends that are founders or own their own businesses that you can talk to, or other people, you haven't created that community of other support group, it's very, very lonely, because ultimately no one really understands unless they've done it or they're in it. So there's no point in talking to your friends about it who work for other big corporates, because they just don't get it. So that was lonely, being then very isolated from, you know, all of my friends and family as well, and just having that break just to talk about nonsense really, and just being able to switch off. I find switching off very difficult anyway, so I had to find other ways to try and separate work and self-care.
So you got us started already. So how would you describe your high point and your low point in the last year?
It's a very good and complicated question. There's not one high or one low. I don't think it's that systematic. When you're launching a brand and you're running a company, there's many highs and many lows, and it's like a bloody roller coaster. And I think everyone will relate to this from COVID anyway at the moment. You know, I think COVID in itself is everyone's having a roller coaster of emotions. You know, you wake up one day and you just want to pull a duvet over your head and cry all day, and the next morning you're like, I'm ready, let's go. Again, I think it's a really good thing that's happened, and it's shown that remote working is entirely possible, and actually you probably get a lot more out of people when they're remote working than you do, you know, otherwise. And so that's why I say to my team, I'm like, if you wake up in the morning, you're feeling a bit low, then don't go and do something else. Go for a walk, go and do whatever makes you feel better, and work when you're at your most, you know, creative and you're having those energy peaks. And if that's 11 o'clock at night, then fine. But I don't think you can put those time frames on people, especially at the moment. I think the real low point was trying to raise in a global pandemic, and then seeing the reality. You know, I've never thought being a woman hindered me. You know, I was always very proud to be a woman. I think the reality of just how stark those figures are really started to hit me. And then when you can see them going in decline because of what COVID's doing, that's really, really tough. And it's really, really tough when you fundamentally, heart, mind, soul, body, believe in something and believe that it needs to happen and the world needs to have it, but then no one else believes in it. But then when you don't see that coming, it's very disheartening. Yeah, it's really tough to keep going. When you start to see the embers and the traction and the excitement around it, there's nothing that's more fulfilling. It's amazing.
There's highs every day when you start seeing the engagement then.
Yeah, when you start seeing that engagement going up, you're like, oh yeah, happy days.
So, I mean, the pandemic has clearly brought, you know, great struggles, and we've talked about health, financial front, but also the mental health, which you've alluded to. And in 2021, we've seen a year of this, and it's kind of time we lift things up. Can you share, and you've started telling us, you know, you had to find ways to balance and to switch off. How have you managed yourself? Can you share some tips of how you lift yourself up?
For me, it's very much, I've always been, you know, very sporty, very active. And my mum as a kid would just despair. I think a lot of mothers do anyway, but despair about school holidays, because she would just say I just became really annoying. And, you know, I'd get like all this pent up, you know, like energy. And she'd be like, oh, just go in the garden or run around or do something. I think being active and having the space for me had a huge effect on my mental health, just being able to get outside and not see buildings and, you know, have that real space to think. And my morning routine became, you know, before I did anything, get up and get the dogs out and do a good 45-minute walk, whatever the weather. And I listened to, I've got this morning gratitude meditation thing, and I just listened to that as I was walking. And if I felt really low, that genuinely really helped lift me and kind of shift my mood and get my head straight and in the right kind of mind frame. I do a lot of, I never thought I'd ever say this because I hated yoga, but I've started doing loads of yoga, been really, really helpful for my, you know, mental health as well. So yeah, yoga, bar, a lot of anything where you move, and it's really tough, right? A lot of times I'm like, I do not want to do this today. I do not want to do this. I want to sit on the couch, drink a glass of wine and eat chocolate. But as soon as you start moving, you feel like you never regret doing any form of exercise. It always makes you feel better.
It's very funny you say that about yoga, because I used to say that, when I first started in banking, my sister would make me go to a 1 hour and a half class yoga on a Saturday. And I was like,
that's long.
I can't possibly stand this. And actually 2 years ago, I started doing yoga every morning for 15 minutes. And it's been great as a morning routine. And I keep it most days. And it changed my back pain immensely. I started because I wanted to have a morning routine that was different. That wasn't just kind of like wake up, shower, go to work. And that mentally made a huge difference. And then 2 months later, I realized how much better I was. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm a yoga fan now. And how do you think Fem-Foundry can help in this process of helping women lifting themselves up from what was just a big shake that as we've discussed?
In so many ways, like now I look on the platform and we've got women from all over the world joining. We've got women from Canada, China, Hong Kong, lots in Europe as well, Spain, Portugal. I think it really helps because you get a lot of different viewpoints. So it could be like the same topic, but slightly different shifts of perspective. And I'm really seeing now on there, women are using it to lift each other up. To people have gone off and they're creating their own little groups and they're creating their own little talks and they've met loads of women on there. So you can see that it's really motivating people and exciting them to do stuff and really helping women as well who are like, okay, right, what's next? And how do we, like all the things we just talked about, like how do we shift this? Getting the women that are coming on board now, and they will be the women that use Fem-Foundry, are those women who really who believe in collaboration, who believe that it's necessary and aren't there to kind of try and compete and tear each other down. And so I think that education, as we build the academy out as well, I think that'll be so important. We've had women reach out to say, we did a breathwork course with one of our leaders, Aisha McKenzie. We had one woman email us saying she'd heard of breathwork but didn't really know what it is. She was like, I didn't know what it was. And she did this session and she was like, I'm going to do it. She's taking up all the courses. She's like, when are you doing a course? It's going to change my life, from across her business to her everything. And she said, I really like that you're offering different things and diverse things. As I said, we're doing ones coming up, how to manifest, how to script, we've got modern tarot, we've got one coming up on cryptocurrency. What is it? How the hell do you work it? How to make some money in it? So lots of kind of side hustle type stuff as well as your more traditional stuff. A multitude of ways, I guess.
Well, I guess you answered my question on all of the opportunities you see. I guess the big opportunities in bringing all this together. So Amy, how are you personally looking forward and seeking to lift yourself up from this uncertainty and working on your mindset, making sure that you stay positive and there's not too many nights of wine and chocolate and more nights of walking around and keeping active?
No more wine and chocolate. I'm now pre-lockdown doing a month, no alcohol, because I'm like, right, I think we've all probably drank a bit too much alcohol during lockdown. Many people have anyway. So yeah, I'm doing a month off, just balance my mind and body before kind of we emerge out. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's that delayed gratification. I just think, God, if it's been this hard and this tough, but then I've seen some amazing successes and we're on the verge of all this stuff. How great is it going to be when I can actually see everyone and share that with people, go to an office and see my team a couple of 2 or 3 times a week. And my team and I were talking about productivity. Our productivity is sky high. You can imagine trying to launch courses and events and all of these things when you're all in different, digital and all parts of the world. Ultimately it takes longer. Whereas we were like, oh my God, imagine when we're in an office and we can just be like, hey, does someone know this? It's going to be productivity when you combine, I think, the remote working and actually seeing people. It's going to go sky high. And I think it's shifted everyone's perspectives to be a lot more grateful for much smaller things. And if it hasn't, then I don't know what planet you've been living on, quite frankly.
Yeah, my last guest at the podcast was Francesca Jeans, and she actually has a journal for children on gratitude, which I've been using for my children for a while.
Right, that's really good.
We were talking about that. I told her, are people really going to stay grateful? But yes, you're right. I was under the assumption that everyone kind of became a bit more grateful. Amy, we're getting at our end. Knowing what you know today, would you give yourself different advice if you'd go back in time?
Well, yes, obviously, because I know loads more now. So I feel that's an obvious
just one. You can just pick one.
Don't be impatient, which sounds really silly, but I'm the most impatient person ever. Cooking these happened yesterday. And I think you be easier on yourself.
Patience was definitely one of the topics that kept coming up in season 1 of the podcast. When I was interviewing people through the first lockdown, more than half the mothers said that the biggest lesson they had, or that they had to work on, was definitely patience.
Yeah.
And so if you could pick one, what was the biggest challenge the last year has brought you?
Being a female trying to raise cash in a global pandemic for launching a company. I know that's not one, but they all kind of go into one.
Cheating is allowed. What was the biggest lesson you got from this pandemic?
Gratitude, and to be grateful. I think it's slowed us all down. Patience goes into that. It's definitely not my virtue. But I think to be grateful, you find gratitude in much smaller things. Gratitude. Yeah.
Right, so let's look forward with 2 surprise questions. Can you give a book recommendation for 2021?
Oh God, no. I haven't read any books. So no, the answer is no, because I love books, but I only ever get to read books when I go on holiday, and obviously there's been none of that happening. So
what do you mean you haven't been on holiday?
Reading a book right now is a luxury that I really do not have.
No, that's fine. And if you had one word to define your 2021, what would that be?
I am optimistic.
That's a good one. Amy, thank you so much for being part of the Make Space for Growth podcast. It was a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I loved it. It's good fun.
Thank you. I had such a good time speaking to Amy today. We got deeply into conversation, which you can probably tell by the length of the podcast. But after we had just so much good talk about women for International Women Week, I did think this was the best theme to follow up from it. Amy is creating a platform solely dedicated to women empowerment and growth, no matter how each woman defines themselves. If you join the platform, make sure to come say hi and let me and Amy know how you found it. That's it for today. Yet again, I had such a good time doing this podcast. This podcast is produced by Alice Stansfield, my hidden angel, making us sound even better. I hope you enjoyed it, and I get to do this.